Hi everybody, pleased to say that I'm joined with Jan and Mike Humphreys, that some of you will know. So Jan was responsible for running the fan club for a good number of years, finished in the mid-90s.
Yeah.
And Paul Humphreys, some of you will know, is Paul Humphreys? Mike Humphreys is Paul Humphreys' older brother, that some of you will be familiar with, and he co-wrote the original biography. So I've got some questions some of you sent in, which I'm going to touch down on, and later we'll go into some other details. So Jan and Mike, can I just turn around and say absolutely fantastic that you've given your time out. And I know in recent times there's been some health issues with yourselves, so I hope everything's okay.
Yeah, we're okay.
Yeah, we're recovered.
We're into our pensioners' years now. And we go out every day, try to get exercise and keep healthy.
Sure.
But we've both had cancer, and you know, some of it's ongoing, but we're okay. And
yeah, treatment's working with me.
We're doing fine.
Yeah.
I think you're both looking absolutely great as well. So thanks ever so much for taking time out. I'm going to ask a question from somebody called John Buckley.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Mike, we're just touching down on the original biography that you've got a copy of there.
Yeah.
He's asking, do you have any interviews or other material from the band from when the research, if you like, from that book was being done? Or have you got any maybe anecdotes or memories of actually doing this original biography?
I think, you know, I was very naive as a kind of journalist, as it were, a writer. I mean, I loved writing, and I think when I asked the guys if I could write the book, they were quite happy for me to do that. I had a lot. Obviously, I knew a lot about Paul's early life, which we could include in it. I think I was a bit phased with phoning up people for interviews, because we were just talking about that before. This was in the days before there was like social media and internet and all that kind of thing. So it was very much like phoning people up, asking them questions about the band, and then writing it down, and then making sure that I'd given an accurate thing of what they'd said. I think there were several things in my. Johnny Waller was the editor mainly, and he kind of obviously interviewed people as well. But I think he, being an experienced journalist, he was quite keen to edit stuff. So there are a few things that he thought perhaps weren't that shouldn't be included. I mean, I can remember one thing, just like a little incident where our son Guy was quite small. He's about 2 or 3, and one of the bouncers at the gig took him to the front of the stage because obviously being so small, he thought he was doing a real favour, and the speakers were so loud. Suddenly we could see the bouncer bringing Guy back, and Guy was his fingers in his ears. So I mean, I think sometimes Johnny, perhaps rightly, took out some little family quirks that weren't.
Yeah.
He considered that important.
I can remember him thinking it was a bit too cosy. Like some people maybe thought the newsletters were a bit cosy, a little bit too cosy for a proper book. But we didn't really think that, did we? Because we thought it would be good for you to write what you thought very naturally, but some bits were taken out.
Yeah, that's right. And I think sort of suddenly having a famous brother was a big incentive to me to want to write about it. It's not every day your brother's up on stage there singing away. And I've known Andy for a while as well. So and Mal and Martin, because Jan actually taught Martin and Paul.
You taught Martin?
Yeah, I was a French teacher in my second year teaching, and we'd come from the East End teaching for a year. That was a very tough experience. And then I found myself in Mel's, this really nice boys' school with really nice boys in it, including Martin and Paul. Paul was so excited that I was his teacher that whenever I asked a question, he put his hand up eagerly to whatever it was, and he was very, very proud of me. Martin was a year behind with his French, not through his own fault. And I realised just last year actually, that Martin had rooted out these 2 reports from when I taught him and French, and I was really horrified when he said that I'd written something rather horrible on his report. I'd said, something like, you have done absolutely no revision. I don't know how you're ever going to master this language, but you really need to, pull yourself. Oh, you should have come to see me, and I would have helped you. And then I was pretty horrified. But then I had a saving grace, because then the next report he did really, really well, and it wasn't due to me at all. He'd really worked so hard, and he said that previous report made him work really hard. And
he actually found these
whether
reports.
It did or not.
He'd actually found these reports because he'd been looking for. He'd been asked if he had any material for the new biography of the band.
Yeah.
So that's when he came across the reports.
But I don't think it was in the book. I'm not sure. And if it wasn't, there's some new information for you.
So teaching, slight digression, but teaching Paul Humphreys, what was he like as a pupil?
He was, Paul was very, very shy, of course, as a youngster. When I first knew him when he was 9 years old, he was a bit mixed up because his sister had died not very long before. It affected him really terribly, as you can imagine. And he saw me as a bit of an intruder, but he was very, very shy. But when I taught him, when he was probably a little bit older,
about 13.
About 13. He was just an angel, a delight to teach, because he was on my side. He was on my side by then. So that was good.
The original biography, do you think one day that would ever see a reprint, another print run at all, or do you think that's where it is?
I don't know. Yeah, I think because it only goes up to 1986. Obviously, the OMD have had lots of different permutations since then. I don't know. I think it's of its time. It was obviously people found it quite interesting, and and like you were saying, it's obviously seen as a precious thing for OMD fans now, because there was only that one until this new one.
Yeah.
And I guess since I was just thinking, oh, maybe you should ask if you can write another one and bring it up to date. But then I was thinking, the very nice bit about that was your personal experience of growing up with Paul and being at 3 Frankby Road and living there and seeing that very first seed that was that was planted, that was going to become this huge, enormous, adorable band that everybody loves. It was that process of seeing the beginning of it all.
Sure. Yeah.
That was
that was what my incentive to help write the book, really. Yeah.
I'm just going to sort of jump onto a question that's been sent in by Steph. And Steph was one of the instigators in saving the 632 3003 phone box. So
amazing.
So so that phone box obviously has had a revamp and a new look, and has got regular visitors going down. And Steph wants to ask, you mentioned 3 Frankby Road. Memories of living at 3 Frankby Road, and she's saying that she was in the house only yesterday. And some memories of 3 Frankby Road. 3 Frankby Road, for those that don't know, is the house that Paul and Mike grew up in. Yeah,
I mean, obviously, it was so interesting to have music being played. In the house. I was into music myself. I liked obviously the Beatles and stuff, 60s stuff, early 70s stuff, Led Zeppelin and so on. And Paul was into quite a lot of 70s bands music, and he and Andy obviously Kraftwerk and the Noe and all those kind of bands. But the main thing was, when they thought they'd got a nice tune going, they would play it over and over and over. And I guess it used to drive my mum a bit mad, although she was out at work a lot. But the memory of, you know, obviously electricity was and I also remember them when they were just doing She's Leaving, because the melody of that, I you know, that really kind of hooked on me. That was in my mind for, as soon as I heard that, it was oh gosh, you know, I couldn't get it out of my head. So yeah, I mean the fact of that they were in the back room writing this material, even before that, with messing around with bits of radio, like Paul on his own would pull apart bits of radios and you know, put pointers on them and make all kinds of strange noises, and then Andy would come and they'd try and kind of blend that sort of noisy stuff with trying to actually make it into some kind of song. But you remember Guy dancing to
it was
them,
very,
don't you?
very, very exciting to us to have this fledgling band. And Guy, our younger son, was only 2. He used to go in and they had a box with lights on it, very rude, very basic, and all the lights came on and they were flashing, and he'd be dancing and Andy would be loving it and making a fuss of him, and it was just such a really lovely atmosphere, and it was just magical.
I mean,
and
one other important memory, of course, was when Carol came from Dindisc
oh yes,
to sign them up.
yeah,
To the house.
That was
she
amazing.
actually came to the house and listened, and
Yeah.
you know, and they were obviously they didn't know what was going to happen at that point. But then when Paul and Andy told us afterwards that, you know, they'd been signed to it and we were going to make a record, and it was like, wow, it's just, it was phenomenal.
And your mum's little, like all mothers, but your mum's little prophecy about, well, you'll never make a go of
Don't
it.
give
I
up
mean,
your
it's
day
nice,
job.
little hobby. But you'll need a proper job sometime.
You'll need to get a day job. You mentioned about the heating of the house and the coffee supplies going. What was all? And obviously Mally and Martin, were they visitors as well?
Martin used to come around occasionally. I don't remember Mal coming to the house actually.
Mal did actually come to the house because reflected by
times.
the large telephone bill that
Oh yes, he did.
that resulted. But your mum was not well off at all.
No.
But she was so generous and kind, a wonderful person, and she actually let her house while she went and earned some pennies. She let her house to Andy. He became like a little lodger really, and there he'd be with the electric fire blazing away, doing his music while Paul was working at the swimming baths. Was he at that time?
Yeah.
Building a concrete wall. And then they'd come together and do their thing together. But I think right from the beginning there was that gelling, there was that enthusiasm, that passion for what they wanted to do, and we all felt it.
And then once they were on the road, you know, Frankby Road it became a place where Paul would just arrive back after concerts, or between concerts even, if it was in the UK obviously, and he'd have all this washing, so my mum would have to do all the washing and all the ironing, and he'd mum would say, well, when do you want it for? And he'd say, tomorrow. It's like, what?
And she stayed up all night, and she didn't have a washing machine. And she did all his washing and pressed all his shirts, and she was just an amazing mother. Did that, like we all do.
We were talking earlier about Paul being quite young and the house being rewired, Paul being very young, and he took an interest in the electrician.
Oh yeah, I mean that was when we were in London, when he was slightly younger. But yeah, I mean he always had that kind of technical ability, and that's why he liked messing around with old radios and things, I think. And I mean, for instance, in the when there was the band with the id, and Paul wasn't really a musician in that part of it, you know, and they had like 3 guitars and drums and things like that, and Paul was really just the roadie, making sure everything was plugged in and sorted out. That hasn't really changed either. But then, so Andy suggested he tried keyboards, which he did do, and he found he got those long, slim fingers that just did it right. But of course, it was the days of electronics starting as well, which he had an interest in. Once he learnt that, you know, not only could keys play actual music, but they could also play sounds, that kind of blended into the start of OMD, didn't it? So when the Winston, the tape recorder, so they could tape sounds and sing against that, and that was all, you know, all part of it. Yeah.
It's quite an exciting place, number 3 Frank B.
Oh, it was.
By all accounts.
Yeah.
A quick question from somebody called Dave Canning. He says, best and work experiences of being alongside or close to the band in those early days.
Just as was then as is now. They were just two ordinary, wonderful guys, Paul and Andy. Just know them now just as we knew them then. Just normal, great people, and is that
yeah, no, absolutely perfect.
Just when we see them now and we go backstage, and it's just like it was back then.
Yeah, big hugs all round.
And big hugs all round, and concern. Of course, Andy has known us for so many years. It's just like extended family, that band to us.
Yeah, and I think it is weird when we see them and then people want to interview them, or you know, people want to be with them and things like that, and you think, well, that's just it's only my brother, you know.
Yes.
No big deal. But yeah, and I think, you know, through the years, Andy and Paul have kind of, although there was a bit in the middle where they obviously, you know, weren't together, you can see how the relationship's grown, you know, which we're very pleased about because we love the both of them. So yeah.
And so Mark Rogers says, do you wish you'd been in the group?
Well, we used to sing and play guitar a bit, didn't we? We once went to was it a charity thing or some church thing where our friends in London, our new friends, asked us, they said they were doing this garden party or something, would we be able to play a song? So we practiced for ages, didn't we? And then forgot the words. So Jan was better on the guitar than me. I've got half decent voice, I suppose.
Very decent.
And so yeah, but the trouble is we couldn't play instruments.
And I think the thing is, we're a young family, and Mike was out teaching, which, as we all know, is a very hard job. And I had a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old, so there was no way I could, either of us could escape and go touring and playing on stage and so on.
I always wrote poetry, so I fancied writing some lyrics. In fact, you know, because occasionally I thought, you know, Paul maybe could have had a better lyric there, but I didn't dare kind of suggest anything.
But Guy, our younger son, was great on the drums. He'd inherited the Humphreys, you know, drumming, and he longed when he was older to be a drummer in the band. He was waiting for an invitation to be their drummer.
Yeah.
But no, unfortunately, that didn't happen.
But Guy, I can remember being absolutely made up when we'd moved from Frankby Road. We were living in different parts of Hoylake then. Andy turned up one day with a guitar for him, and he said, "Here, this is yours." And you know, Guy was like, "What? Me? Guitar?" And he wasn't very self-assured, but he made darn sure that he learnt how to play the guitar, because he thought, if Andy's given me this guitar, I'm going to learn how to play it. And he's a brilliant guitarist now.
Brilliant now, yeah.
He's a brilliant guitarist.
So that was the aspiration from that one moment. What a story that is. Jan, there's a guy called John Iron Hill. He says he sent you a card when the best of got a gold disc. The best of OMD got a gold disc. He says, and you sent a personal reply back to him. And he says he still got it.
Well, that's very, very lovely. Probably quite undeserved, because I'm sure there were many people who did not get a good reply from me, because I got so many letters.
We were swamped,
and I was in charge of the fan club. It all happened very hurriedly, because they had to save money. It was getting very expensive, the fan club, and several issues going on. So there I was, totally unqualified fan club person, and having this young family and having all these letters every day. So I do apologise again to anybody who did not get a reply. And
then it was also waiting for the copy, wasn't it?
And
waiting for Andy's input, which didn't. The band was so busy that Andy didn't have time to write anything.
Yeah.
So.
But rest assured, I always, wanted to do a proper job, and I wanted to reply to people, and I wanted to help them, because from that job I realised that this band was very important in people's lives.
Yeah.
And that made me feel so good that I knew these people who'd made this, and they were so unusual in the content of their songs, and just the whole thing was just unique.
So when you were trying to wait for copy from Andy, or as people were sending in things, was he quite responsive and forthgiving and helpful?
Yeah, Andy, as always, very, very, helpful in responding to questions that the fans were
lots
asking.
of questions came up.
And we think that, well, we are making excuses for one of the best guys in the world to us, Paul Humphreys. We are making excuses for him. When we say that he was the more practical guy, and he, probably didn't really like writing very much. Andy was more like us, more a literary guy. And he really loved writing, but was also obviously must have been a person who was more interested in.
And certainly, like we said,
responding to
Paul was shy. Andy was naturally outgoing, whereas Paul was a bit kind of a bit less sure of himself.
Yeah.
But obviously isn't now. But obviously, at the time, Andy used to do a lot of the front. Well, he was the front man, but he was also did a lot of the talking. And some people maybe thought that he was too much and there wasn't enough of Paul. But I think initially Paul was glad for Andy to because he wasn't he wasn't really kind of confident or used to doing that. So it may have looked that Paul was a bit in the background, but he didn't. It was his choice. He wasn't Andy wasn't pushing him out of the way or anything.
But they were very busy, so sometimes there was obviously a delay in Andy being able to reply to these questions. But I was very, very grateful that he was there to do that, because that just made it so personal.
Oh, definitely.
And just regressing to Andy being a younger man, I think you were telling me a story of him. Was he going into a shop with a long coat and holding a book of poetry or something?
Yeah, that was actually my mum's memory.
Oh, it's your mother's memory?
Yeah,
okay.
Because when we lived at Frankby Road, she had to go out to work, and she worked at the newsagents, which was about a block away. And Andy lived across the green from there, and he would, to go to Mum's shop, he would actually have to probably pass the phone box that we're going to talk about later. And Mum remembers him walking into the shop because he had this massive, like an afro haircut, and a long coat, looking very, very serious, usually holding a book of some kind of other, usually poetry. And of course Andy, wrote his own, and I think, people might have looked at him then and thought it's a bit of a pseudo-intellectual, perhaps. But that was, that was his persona at the time. He was quite into stuff like that, and I think that obviously then when he found the music to go with that was kind of his lyrics kind of took off, because he found a home for his poetry.
Yeah. We've got somebody again from the Facebook group we've got running called Mike Clawson. I mean, the name might ring a bell here. He says Mike, as in yourself, taught him at the Black Horse Hill.
Black Horse Hill Junior School. Yes, I remember it well. Yes.
He says here, apparently you gave him his first ever copy of Electricity, and he hasn't got it any longer.
Right. Oh gosh, that would have been quite valuable now, I guess. but no, I mean, I think because I was so proud of my brother, my memories at Black Horse Hill are that one morning, because there were all various bits of music were chosen for a school assembly, and I was so proud when Souvenir came out. I actually various teachers put the music on in the morning, and I decided I'd put Souvenir on while everybody came into assembly, and I was trying to say to people, "This is my brother's song. It's my brother's song." And some of them, kind of worked it out. And eventually, obviously, they were asking me questions about the band once they became more famous. And I remember telling all my class when the 1984, the Sheffield concert came out with my interview with Peter Powell, I said, don't forget, watch TV tonight. You'll see your teacher on there. So I'm glad that Michael is still obviously a fan, but I guess he shouldn't have got rid of the records.
No, I'm not so sure why he actually did that. Leona Gomes says, can you tell any secrets about Paul?
Well, we were racking our brains about this because I don't really know any of Paul's secrets, but I do know that when he was young, he had this Humphreys trait of being a little frustrated with silly small things, and being a bit shy and having a bit of lack of confidence. And so when I first knew Mike, and we weren't married, and I came over from college, and I loved Hoylake. I loved the open spaces and the baths and everything that was good about living by the sea. And we went putting with Paul and Mike, and Paul was only 9 when I first knew him. He had his little putting stick, or whatever they call them, and he made a mistake and he flung his putting thing onto the ground and had a huge paddy, and I just laughed. I couldn't believe that somebody would do that, and I just laughed. I just couldn't understand it. And then the next thing was,
a few minutes later,
Mike did exactly the same thing, made this awful mistake and hurled his putting thing as well onto the ground, and I just couldn't believe that at all. We were a lot older.
Maybe we need a put-off here again, don't we?
Yes. Yeah. But I just remember, I guess that was a sign of Paul's lack of confidence, and having lost his sister just a very short time before.
Yeah, I mean, he's good in other ways in that he was always the goalkeeper. Me and my friends used to play soccer in the park, and nobody wanted to go in goal, so really Paul learned how to be a goalkeeper because he thought it was perhaps good to play with his brother and his friends. It might look good, but we used to absolutely batter him with shots, and he got really good because he was determined. He thought, well, I'm not going to let these guys beat me every time. So he actually became a very good goalkeeper. I mean, that's not really a secret, is it? But,
no. He hasn't told us any of his secrets. I don't think Paul would have many secrets because he's quite a straightforward guy.
Okay. A question from Catherine Hooper, and she's asking if you've got any favourite OMD songs and any particular reason why you like them so much.
Well, I've always liked Statues, so I was really made up when they chose that as a track to play in the Liverpool Philharmonic. I actually used that in school as a dance routine. I had can't remember what one of the plays was, but it was like a magic thing, a bit like kind of Lord of the Ringsy type kind of thing with wizards and things in it.
Because you wrote the plays and I wrote the songs.
Jan wrote the music, and I can remember this, just the kind of the ethereal quality of of that music. I mean, I know it was originally written about Joy Division,
Ian Curtis,
wasn't it, who died? But I think it obviously it's very, very poignant, and that means a lot to me. I mean, I love Forever Live and Die as well. I think I'll always love that song.
I love so many OMD songs because they're just all so different, and like I say, Andy's lyrics are amazing.
They're very, very different.
Obviously, Gay and all those.
We like
songs.
Native Daughters, don't we?
Native Daughters of the Golden West. That is an amazing.
Again, that was a
song, an anthem, really.
Yeah.
But as I say, there's so many different ones. There's so many beautiful melodic songs.
Walking on Air. I really like.
So many different ones. You can't really say that was your absolute favourite.
So coming over to the split period and the birth of the listening pool, I can recall a night where, in inverted commas, the album was launched, the first listening pool album, Still Life. I believe it was the Hill House, Heswell. I think you guys are there. I think Paul, Mally, Martin were there. And a handful of OMD fans, and I bought a record player, and we had a really interesting launch of the listening pool album. What were those days like with the listening pool?
Well, I think for us, because we'd known Andy a long time, it was difficult to split, wasn't it? Really, we really couldn't see why. I mean, obviously, you know, there were lots of things going on between them at that time, but obviously we were keen for the listening pool to do well, and we certainly liked the album that they put together.
Yeah, we like the songs.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
So a little question from myself, which I was going to ask a little bit later. I'm going to come here now. Do you think the comeback of Andy and Paul and the original lineup coming back, do you think that was destiny?
I do.
I think it was.
So,
yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, if you look at, I mean, it's obviously a different sort of comparison, but if you look at Lennon and McCartney, without each other, something perhaps wasn't quite there. Oh yeah, I mean, they don't get me wrong, they made great music, and I think Andy made great music, you know, and we've just said about the listening pool. But I think somehow, because of how they'd been in their early days, how they'd been so successful, and you know, the music was really both of them having their input in. I think yeah, eventually it was going to happen, wasn't it? That they're going to come back, and I think now with the new albums that they've made, it's so much easier now than it was in the early days. In that, Paul can just write a bit of melody down, email it to Andy, or have whatever they do, electronic to Andy. Andy can do his bit, he sends it back, and you know, they can actually work kind of independently but together at the same time. They don't always have to be in the studio, and I think, you know, they each value each other's contribution, whereas maybe early on it's a bit difficult when you become famous so quickly, that, you know, there may be a bit of ego involved, but I think now, you know, you learn through experience that you know, you do need other people. You can't just do it all on your own. And with the best will in the world, you know, Martin and Malcolm were not forthcoming as much about the writing music as Paul was. And I think Andy missed Paul and Paul missed Andy. And I think it's great they're back together.
I think the relationship is totally cemented, and their music is totally cemented, and has become just the great onward natural thing that they're going to do together and become better and better.
Do you still keep yourselves up to date or listening to the new material?
Yes.
You know, the last album, Punishment
We're
of Luxury.
huge fans of OMD.
Oh yeah, we go to all the concerts we can. You know, well, not all the concerts, but you know, the ones we can get to, we do. But I just think, you know, Paul and Andy now, they are. It's not just the music, you know. They're very close in other ways, and they've helped each other in their private lives, as it were, as well. You see what I mean? You know, they've got on really well, and they help each other.
I think maybe when you're younger, you know, you do have these, shall I say, perceptions, or you bother very much about the smaller things, and as you get older, you get a better perspective.
Sure.
So it's sort of ironic, really, that the biography, Mike, that you wrote went up to Pacific Age, which is the final album, basically, and it took decades for another biography to emerge. Do you have any thoughts on the new biography that's come out?
I think it's obviously a good idea to have, you know, input from the fans. I mean, it's a different kind of book from a straightforward biography. I think it's good that it's kind of interspersed some of the band's memories with fans' memories and that. So in that sense, it's like a
melee.
a good kind of record. But obviously it isn't a straightforward biography, so maybe
It's different.
maybe there's room for a biography as well. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot of people say there's some significant missing elements in there, but I think it does the job well for what it was intended to do.
It's what they wanted. So
Yeah.
obviously, they're pretty happy with that, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So 1995 was it you moved to the Lake
Yes,
District,
yeah.
and the old phone box was still there, and the days of phone boxes were coming. Well, what did you think about the phone box being removed, coming back, and then a Friends of a phone box being formed? What was your thoughts on that?
That was just, it was phenomenal. I mean, obviously, red frame white light 6323003 was firmly in here, and I knew that, because neither of them had. No, Paul didn't have a phone, did he? So
No.
Paul used to ring Andy from there, so yeah, it was well used, and I think it was a good focal point. And I think anything that's actually in a song.
Yeah.
Is particularly, it didn't do brilliantly well, but people remembered it, and I think it's another thing. Like 3 Frankby Road now, it's kind of part of the historical network.
It's
of how the
Mel's
band
history
started.
now, and thanks to people who pushed for that. I think it's very important they did push for it. It's the OMD, the little symbol of
Yeah, it's interesting.
success in Mel's.
Interesting the story that was told. I don't know how true this is, but the guy who runs the pub, the railway inn just by that, we met him at a concert, and he was sort of saying how they actually went to find the phone box, and it was in a field with about 10,000 other phone boxes, and the guy just said to him, "Yeah, take any one." I said, "No, we don't want anyone. We've got to find the right one." And somehow it had, I think it had, it must have had the number on the glass, or there was some way that they could identify it as being the one that was in Mel's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's quite miraculous that actually say 1 minute it's gone, and then down to the demand it actually reappeared.
Yeah.
I do believe Red Frame White Light will be performed live later on this year when OMD get back to touring. So
Right.
what a regression that's going to be.
Yeah.
So life in the lakes after 1995. So you've been here, is it 25 years plus?
Since 1995.
So it's 18, 20, 23 years, yeah.
23 years.
23. What's life been like away from Liverpool?
Idyllic. Because
That sounds bad.
I've always adored the Lake District from when I was 16. I had a job at the youth hostel in Elterwater, and it was a friend's aunt was the warden there, and I just didn't realise there was such a heaven on earth as this area, and I just fell in love with the lakes, and remembered making the egg sandwiches for the hostelers and being told off for putting too much egg on. I had to scrape it all off. And there was a big budget to follow, and then in the afternoon going on walks and just having a wonderful time.
I think we always used to come up here for holidays, didn't we? So when once the boys had grown up and left home, then we thought, well, let's try and get up here.
And we always thought, what do people do who live in the Lake District? They mustn't ever go on holiday, because they're in that beautiful place, and we still feel like that. It's the magic hasn't worn off. So whenever we go out, we appreciate the scenery and just find the same places just change for us all the time.
But you escaped the rat race as well, didn't you?
Yeah.
We
I
did.
mean,
Well,
I was a
we did.
teacher for 25 years, and I just thought, we needed some kind of fresh start. We didn't know what kind of jobs we were going to get up here. I mean, fortunately, we had a big house where we were, so we exchanged that for a small one here. So there was kind of we didn't have to pay too much, did we? But we knew we'd need some jobs, so we brought all our clothes with us, thinking that
All
so
our
we
old
wouldn't
shoes
throw, we
to burn
wouldn't
on
throw
the
anything
fire.
away, just in case we didn't get a job here. But we did get jobs,
Yeah.
didn't we? So.
And the funny thing was, I think I was about 45 or so. I thought I was so old. I thought we were just going out to grass because, we'd done our stint and we were getting old now. And it was so funny because We weren't actually that old. We've
No.
discovered we weren't actually that old. Our son, our oldest son, is that old now, and we were able to work and carry on working in this wonderful area, and retire here and still carry on enjoying it, and we'll never ever leave it.
Oh, that's brilliant. There's a guy
Even with Brexit.
No,
I'm
no,
afraid.
no. You're remaining.
We're still remaining. Well, we're remaining in the UK.
There's a guy called Steve Barnes in the US, and he was talking to Paul at Salt Lake City, and he asked, how did you decide to join the LDS Church? This is the Mormon.
Yeah.
So
It was quite a long story, but I'll try and cut it short. It was because of, well, it wasn't really because of, our son Guy came home. He'd been working in Manchester area, and he'd met some missionaries who came off the bus, and our son was a bit lost then at that time, and they just handed him a leaflet, and he touched that leaflet and he just felt an overwhelming feeling, totally overwhelming feeling. And to cut a long story short, he sat on that feeling for a lot of years, and then he came home to us and he was very miserable. I asked him why, and he told me this experience he'd had, and I said, well, you've got to go find them, because this is something that you have to do. You've had these feelings, and you've got to act on them. So he went off to find them, gave them all his tobacco, gave them all his alcohol, and we didn't know a thing about that church, and we were very shocked. We wanted to know what it was all about. He went into it just on that feeling, and that because he'd prayed and he'd had a feeling it was right, and that was it. Whereas we were like, oh no, they're going to come after us now, sure as anything. We could see how Guy had turned his life around, but it couldn't be the same answer for us. We couldn't just join that church because he was in it. And to be honest, we were really quite taken aback and scared.
We didn't know absolutely anything about it.
Of having to make a commitment if we had to, which we didn't want to. So we were quite happy as we were going on our walks and everything, and being totally selfish actually with that.
But then I just got,
we studied.
We studied, and I just got a witness one day that it was the right thing to do.
We were prevaricating. What shall we do? What shall we do? We can see how this is good, but it's a huge commitment. It's the kind of church you join that is not just I go to church on Sunday, or it's a life-changing thing, and it's something that nobody can ever force you to do. It's a journey of discovery yourself, really.
Yeah. And it is a Christian church, because a lot of people don't think of that.
There are a lot of myths and misnomers about it.
Yeah, it's because, basically the Book of Mormon is another testament of Jesus Christ, so it really gives you some of the answers that the Bible doesn't have. But I think what the underlying thing is that you feel that Jesus Christ and Heavenly Father, God, loves you, and you get that really feeling deep down.
Yeah.
And that you want to help others.
Yeah, and I think you just
That's
have to have your own
thing.
witness of that.
You do.
Nobody can do it.
Nobody can force you.
So we had a.
We weren't brainwashed or anything.
We've not been brainwashed.
You couldn't possibly be
You couldn't
brainwashed.
be.
You have to make these decisions for
You'd
yourself.
have to say, well, I couldn't. Nobody could force you. I couldn't possibly do that, but. Anyway, that has contributed and enhanced our experience of the lakes as well.
Well, as I say, living in the lakes, you obviously take time out into the suburbs now and again.
Yes.
And I'm going to end here because obviously last year OMD played at the Philharmonic. We played some awesome songs. You just touched down on some of them.
Yeah.
So even in recent times, you've still seen OMD live. Just tell me what it was like to see him at the Philharmonic last year.
Oh, it was absolutely amazing. Again, there's this thing with still that awesome thing that there's my brother up there, playing with a huge orchestra. Something, when he was little, he never kind of imagine. But yeah, and you know, because they're so experienced now, you know, as musicians, so professional. I mean, just the whole thing was just super to watch, wasn't it?
It was the most magical evening that we've had. I mean, it was different to being with the others, but it was their relaxed attitude, and even in that Philharmonic Hall, even the fans being pretty restrained, you couldn't help but feel that excitement, you know, that is always there when they perform. And the natural way in which Andy, you know, relates to his audience. It's a very humble way, I think, he relates to the audience.
So some OMD songs, like Made, as an example, were almost written for an orchestra. But we touched on statues.
Yes.
Who would have ever believed that?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
The whole format of the evening, the way they did that first half and then followed up, it was, I mean, considering that they were both really worried about it.
You never
They
guessed.
were so worried about it, and
guessed.
Paul was talking to us and just saying, oh gosh, we're so under-rehearsed and this might go wrong, and I'm sure there'll be lots of mistakes. And somehow the whole OMD thing, it just took over. And
the first night Andy did forget, I think you went to the first or second night, he did forget. The first night he did forget the
His
song
line.
words to
Yes,
Talking Loud and Clear.
he referred to that.
He says he always does.
Jan and Mike, can I just say thank you ever so much for taking precious time out, and it's great to see you both, and it's, you know, the illnesses that you've had, I'm going to wish you well from everybody out there. And to also say thank you to Sandra, who's been the camera person. Thanks for operating, and hope to see you soon, and thank you for the memories.
You're welcome.
Thank you.